to me, leisure is a feminist tool of creation. Resistance is happening as a byproduct. A person is having her cup of chai or watching sunset and or sitting and just getting lost in a thought, not because she's resisting patriarchy or capitalism or casteism. She's doing it because she has to just do it. And to be able to shrug her shoulders and be able to do that, to me, that is the moment of liberation.
That's the voice of Surabhi Yadav, the founder of Saje Sapne, a non-profit which gives rural women career, life, and technical skills so they can enter the modern workforce. But I reached out to Surabhi to ask about another project, a very personal project she's been working on for about 7 years. It's an Instagram account called Women at Leisure, and it's just that. Pictures of women playing carom board, walking by the beach, having a cup of tea, being idle. Wait until you hear why she created this page and what it means to her and also to me. My name is Shana. Welcome to Season 2 of Her Kajal Won't Smudge. I read up on Women at Leisure and I read up on you and that it's a project you started after your mother passed away. And I thought I'd love to talk to her because, if Women at Leisure is your way of continuing a conversation with your mother, Her Kajal Won't Smudge is definitely mine.
This conversation, especially when it directly relates to my mom, my kajal will smudge because I always end up tearing up.
Mine too.
Yeah. So, this project has kept her memory alive in a way that I didn't anticipate.
So tell me about how the idea for Women at Leisure came to you.
So I lost Ma when I was 23. That was in 2013. And one of the realizations that hit me after her death was that I really didn't know her as a person. Like I knew her as my mother, not even my siblings' mother, my mother. There's a unique dynamic between me and her, and that's the extent of her identity and my understanding of who she was. I grew up in a town called Khargone in Madhya Pradesh. I left home around when I was 17 for studying further education and all of that. And it just hit me that I just didn't know her as a person. Who was she when she was not being my mother, basically? That initially brought a lot of guilt. So there was a lot of grief, but a lot of guilt. And then I started pursuing this series of interviews with people in her life. Of course, with my family members, but also her friends. That who was she? Like, what do you remember about her, right? So one of the Padosi aunties, one of the aunties in the neighborhood in our locality, Gangle auntie, she came and she sat next to me and I asked her, "Aapko mummy ke bare mein kya yaad hai? Like, what do you remember about Ma?" And her immediate response was, "Bhabhi bahut hi shaitan aur mazakiya thi." Your mother was very goofy and naughty. Both my parents were uprooted from their villages in Bundelkhand and they shifted to this town, one, to make sure that the kids got the education, because in our entire community, nobody was really studying beyond 8th or 9th. So they wanted us to study. And two, my father had a government job as a horticulturist. Here is a woman who has studied till 8th. Here is a woman who is uprooted from her usual support system and she's raising 8 kids in a school system where she does not relate with it at all. So I don't remember her as naughty and goofy. I remember her as a taskmaster in the house. She was the reason why the house was running, right? And for Gangle auntie, that was the opening line. Like that's the dominant memory and definition of my mother. Bahut hi shaitan and mazakiya. And I said, "Acha, matlab, how? Kaise?" And then she started talking about it. She said, every evening, 5 to 6 p.m., these women in the locality would sit mostly in our angan. And that's the time before dinner preparation starts. And that's the time after kids have come back from school and have been well fed and the house is clean, right? So this 5 to 6 p.m., these women would sit and then they would talk about their everyday lives. And she said, she would come downstairs and she would just always have jokes to crack. And she would always bring this positive talk for all of us. And she would make us laugh. And then she's talked about Holi, which I vividly remember in our locality, during Holi. So men and boys just go out and about in the town and play colors, right? Women and children at 10 or 11 a.m., that's their Holi would begin. And there would be colors. And at one point there would be sweets and snacks. where all the women will sit and children will sit and enjoy and just chill. In that setup, my mother would basically start an improv or a role play. This would not be a decent role play. It would be raunchy. It will be loud. She'll become lover. She would become a drunk husband who's trying to steal a kiss from his wife, and his wife is absolutely disinterested in having sex. And while she's doing all of this, when she's becoming this man, the aunties in the locality are the ones she's trying to woo, right? It used to be crazy, As a teen, I remember being so embarrassed about this. And other women will join her in this, and they would act out. Some would be very, very shy as well, like, oh, what nonsense, what are you doing? But not even a single woman would leave. Everyone will be part of this circle. And I remember that's who she was. But that personality didn't show up rest of the year. That personality was very contextual. And part of it was also her roots in Bundelkhand. So in general, in Bundelkhand, a lot of places, women are not allowed to attend barat, wedding processions, basically. So as the men of a village are leaving in the wedding procession to go to the other village to get the marriage done, there's this ritual called Jugya, where daughter-in-laws, especially who are in this big ghungats, they wear pants and shirts. Their ghungats are still on. And then they have sticks in their hands, and they run after all the men who are going to be going in this wedding procession, and they beat them up. And it's a hilarious setup that in which it happens. And I remember my mother leading that thing. I remember my mother in the ghungat wearing pant and shirt and running after men, especially my father. So that's who she was. That one conversation with Gangle auntie just opened the series of memories which were so fun and pleasant. And that made me question more that what was she doing when she was not being my mother? So from there, I started documenting my sister's life, whose life is much closer to my mother's. And from then on, I just couldn't stop clicking and asking and talking about leisure to women. So it's been, 7 years now.
I wanted to also ask you about the photographs. I know you take many of the photographs, but do you now also get photographs from many other people?
So I started by taking photographs and videos and post them. Like, it was all mine. In fact, for first 5-6 years, it was all my stuff. But last 1.5 years, like, I've just opened crowdsource basically. Because again, I can't have access to people's intimate spaces, like their living rooms and their bedrooms and all. And it's just amazing. Like, so many different contexts show up on my feed now. I do take photographs. I don't publish all the photographs and videos that come to me. I think the context and the consent, like, those are the two big asks. One, the person should consent for this photograph to go in a public social media. And two, you need to ask them, was this a leisure and why was this a leisure, right? Like, for example, so many people, a lot of well-intentioned people send me photographs of street side vendors or like women sitting in a, back of a big temple. And they would just send the photograph to me without any context. And the issue is because most likely they don't even know their names. And only a person can tell them, or a group of people who are involved in their leisurely activity, only they can tell you whether they are at leisure or not. Like, a simple example that I give to people is a mother playing with her child could be a lot of work, could be a lot of leisure. And only she can tell you whether she's at leisure right now or she's doing the work. So there's context and consent. I think that's how the photographs get published.
So I was reading somewhere that you've said that, even though you've overwhelmingly had very positive responses from people, there are some people who say to you, you're showing a picture of a woman in a kitchen. How can you say that this is her leisure? How can you say that she's not just kind of part of the sexist role that she's expected to play and that she's just working very hard in the kitchen?
So far, Women at Leisure has been such a warm and sweet and a very welcoming, vulnerable space. But yeah, I think the person who had criticized, she had a very legit criticism. She said that this is romanticizing regressive traditions. Like, she's saying you're celebrating Karwa Chauth as a leisurely moment, and that's just so regressive, and this doesn't make sense. And I understand her frustration, honestly. But the thing is, a big part of feminism is about a choice a person is making in the circumstances they are. It could be a manipulated choice. And to me, who gets to do what and where is a game of permission. in a lot of setup in India, religion gives a big permission for women to be at leisure. Religion allows women to access public space without guilt. Religion allows, women in villages to venture out of villages without men because अरे कहीं पे जाके पूजा करना है. Religion allows women to go hysterical and go mad and let go of their pallu and sharam and all of that. And nobody's going to comment on their character while a Devi has entered her body, right? So it's her reality. She is saying she is at leisure right now. So I have to accept it rather than virtue signaling that, पर आपको पता है ये आपके साथ कितना गलत हो रहा है. It's not a feminism, right? It's feminisms. Like my mother had her own set of feminism. She brought in the world. She had her own understanding of freedom and choice with which she raised me. And now I have my own. Whenever I work on this project in whatever capacity, it's a lens of inquiry. It's not a lens of judgment. Just touching upon Karwa Chauth. Where do women in India, in a lot of, again, middle class families, get a chance to explicitly show romance to their partner? And holding that polarity, that Karwa Chauth is pretty regressive for women. It comes at the expense of women's freedom. At the same time, it has created the space for expression of romance and love. It has created space for women in the locality to connect with each other. And you have to hold that polarity if you have to make any feminist discourse go forward. Because if you're going to sanitize feminist discourse from the reality, all you're left with is jargon. You're not left with insight. You're not left with real life. It's just theory,
The Hindu festival of Karwa Chauth is celebrated in parts of central and northern India. Married women observe a fast from sunrise to moonrise for the safety and longevity of their husbands. The criticism against Karwa Chauth is that there is no equivalent for wives. So tell me about the idea that you have that time and leisure are feminist issues.
So what's easily understandable for people is that labor is a feminist issue, right? There are gendered roles on what women can do, what men can do or should do, who would get paid, how much, for what, who would have an easy access to what kind of leisure, who can claim the growth in a certain kinds of labors, right? We have very clear ideas about that. And labor is a feminist issue. The moment labor is a feminist issue, leisure becomes a feminist issue, right? The reason we don't pay attention to women's leisure is because we don't pay attention to their labor. And especially if they are, like my mother, a homemaker. My father's leisure was very visible to me and very, in fact, honored by all of us in the house. My father would come back home and we knew that he needs to watch his TV. And that's the time we don't have to disturb him because wo thak ke aaye hain. My father used to read newspaper in the morning and he would be so engrossed in the newspaper, and we used to make fun of him that if you're sitting next to him and you call him Papa, he would be so engrossed in the newspaper that he would not listen to you. But my mother, you're in any part of the house and you yell, Mummy, and she will reply at any point of the day. So it's not that my mother was not working. It's that her work didn't matter to me. Her work didn't have the economic worth, which is celebrated in the world, right? So the moment labor is gendered, leisure is gendered.
Just to give this some context, according to a 2020 UN report titled Progress of the World's Women, for every 1 hour that men in Pakistan spend on housework, women spend 11 hours. In India, based on a 2019 Time Use survey, Indian women spend over 44 hours a week on unpaid domestic work and caregiving activities. In comparison, Indian men spend just over 5 hours a week on these activities. A 2021 Time Use survey by the Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics and UN Women Bangladesh found that women use around 25% of their daily time on unpaid care work, including cooking, cleaning, washing, taking care of children, while their male counterparts only spend 3.3% of their daily time on such tasks. Not only is this labor unpaid, it is undervalued and often invisible.
In the conventional feminist discourses, we understand hardcore resources as feminist issues. Access to money, access to land, access to different kinds of rights. Time is another resource. Space is another resource. Who can do what with their time and how much and where is a function of your social standing. So that means how many women can walk in the night because they want to take a walk in an evening walk in a fresh air? You look at the city like Delhi, where that community spaces are so shrunk. That community space, at best, when you see at the mass level, is that park in front of India Gate. Otherwise, you're not going to see women chilling out in public spaces. So it's not just time as a resource, it's space as a resource, is activities as a resource. Who is allowed to do what and when and with whom is decided by their social standing. And when we talk about oppression, oppression is such a loaded word. We think of mass, big destruction when we're thinking about oppression. But oppression essentially is in your everyday life. What do you eat? Who do you talk to? Who can you marry? Who can you love? How can you love? That's all oppressive structures showing up.
It's in the everyday, right? It's in the mundane. It's in the stuff that is, the invisible, everyday monotony.
Also in your face, but it's lived as your everyday life. So even if it's in your face, it's not an outlier. And I think if oppression is about telling you how not to be, leisure is exact antidote of that. Leisure is telling you just be, just the way you are. Put your guards down for whatever small window of time and space.
So leisure and liberation seem to be connected in your outlook, right? So how would you define liberation? What would liberation look like?
I think the freedom of being. To me, they're like the leisure and liberation sort of seem like synonyms in some sense, that liberation is that the sense of freedom to just be yourself. So whatever guards you can put down to whatever extent, to whatever window of time, to me, that is a moment of liberation. And we're all playing different kinds of roles all the time, right? Like we're playing social, political, economic roles all the time. At what point can we let these guards down and let our inner lives show up? To me, that is the moment of liberation. And I think leisure does exactly that.
And it's an interesting idea because it's actually liberation in the same way for both men and women. It's about, the moment at which you don't have to play a kind of socially expected role and you can just be.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about the idea of guilt, because, this idea of leisure, liberation, having your cup of chai or going for a walk or whatever it is that you do to feel a bit of relief from the rest of the day, that in order for women, I think in particular, to be able to enjoy that moment of resistance, of freedom, they have to be free of guilt. So how does guilt fit into this?
I mean, the first thing that's coming to my mind is that I would not even call leisure as an act of resistance because it seems limiting to me. It's not just an act of resistance. It's actually a tool to create something, in a sense that to create yourself or allow creating of yourself. And the way I distinguish that is resistance is a lot about fighting back. And I'm trying to say that can we stop fighting back for a minute? Because leisure is just that. You're not even fighting back. You're just being. So there's a politics of creation and then there is a politics of destruction. Both of them are required for any kind of new things to come up. And I think leisure is a lot about politics of creation and less about politics of destruction. And in Hindi, I used to always call it atyachar and bahar. Atyachar is being able to say, this is a problem. This is why this is a problem. These are the systems that the problem is supporting. And bahar is all the possibilities that exist right now and all the possibilities that we can envision. And both are needed. You need atyachar language, you need bahar language. You need atyachar weapons and you need bahar tools. But to me, leisure is a feminist tool of creation. Resistance is happening as a byproduct. A person is having her cup of chai or watching sunset or sitting and just getting lost in a thought, not because she's resisting patriarchy or capitalism or casteism. She's doing it because she has to just do it. And to be able to shrug her shoulders and be able to do that, to me, that is the moment of liberation. To be able to say, no, I'm about this right now. And the way it connects to the guilt is this moment of enlightenment that can happen. That, no, I'm about this. The guilt is happening because of all these oppressive structures, right? Like capitalism has clearly defined that your worth is decided by how much money you make. There is a clear understanding of choti nokri and badi nokri in a hierarchical society like in a country like India, right? Or Pakistan or Bangladesh. तो अगर capitalism is telling you that you're only important when you make a certain level of money, when you wear certain kind of suit, leisure is saying you're complete in whatever shows up. Why does that guilt exist? Because of all of the structures that we have made, all the narratives that we have adopted as lifestyles, right? The social norms, so casteism, right? Like, literally, casteism is a lot about the labor division. It's not gendered, it's literally caste groups that you're supposed to do this kind of job, you're supposed to have this kind of dignity. And to me, leisure is like, I'm above this. I don't want to do this. So the guilt is going to come when you're breaking a norm, when you're not fitting in. And that fitting in ka benchmark is so low in our country, in our context, that a woman sitting and napping in the morning or reading a newspaper in the morning seems like a radical act. But she's doing it not because it's resistance, she's doing it because she wants to. That's it.
There's a really special freedom, I think, that comes from seeing leisure in this way, because if I understand what you're saying, it's that you're moving beyond the binary. You're sort of stepping out of it in some way. So it's not about the push and the pull, it's the stepping out of that dialogue altogether.
Exactly. Because if you don't do that, you're still associating the value of leisure with how much can it resist. For example, in capitalism, people do talk about break and vacation and holidays. In fact, the most conversation on breaks that happen, it comes from the corporate, comes from the businesses. But the way they talk about holidays and vacations and break is like, take a break so you will come more productive. You will be rejuvenated to be better at your job. And what I'm saying is, no, leisure has a value in itself. You don't have to be at leisure because you're going to be more productive. You have to be leisure because you're just being. That's an innate need of you. That's how you're going to connect with yourself. That's how you're going to flourish your entire inner world. That's how your relationships are going to flourish. So that's the reason I constantly push back the idea that leisure is not a weapon of resistance. It's a tool of creation. Because the moment it becomes about resisting, it's still work.
Right.
I think to me, that distinction is very important. And probably that's one way you'll get over the guilt.
I think the guilt one is a bigger issue in some ways, because the guilt and all that it carries is connected with the people around you and what they're thinking of you, right? So tell me about your feminism. When did you come to call yourself a feminist, and why?
This was after Jyoti Singh's case. I was in college third year, and she was raped and she was kidnapped very close to my college, IIT Delhi. Mehrauli is when she was picked up in the bus. I just couldn't fathom what happened. I was, 21, 22 at that time. And until then, I didn't have the language of feminism. I just didn't. I grew up in a small town, and when I came to IIT, I didn't even have proper English in my lexicon, That case just shook me up. Like, not just me and a couple of our friends in IIT Delhi, we just didn't know what to do. Like, and not doing was not an option. I was part of some of the marches, but I was so restless. Like, the punishment or catching them and putting them in jail didn't make sense. Like, nothing made sense. It had to be me. Like, I had to do something about it. And I think that's when I started reading about crimes against women. And that's when I stumbled upon Kamala Bhasin's a lot of songs and poems. And she talks about feminism in very simple language. She sings a lot about in very simple language. And I think that's when the word was introduced, feminism, feminist. And I felt so understood and validated for a minute, like, oh my God. And I think that's what happens to a lot of young people when they stumble upon the language of feminism, especially women. All of a sudden, their life gets validated. All of a sudden, you have the way to express all the things that you've been doing all your life. 21, 22 is when I actually got to know about the word. And since then, there was no turning back. I think feminism, I don't know, saved me, made me grow, it does, it gives me a lot.
I ask every woman I interview this question because I think that on the surface of it, I want to sort of get rid of some of the bra-burning and radical views that people have when they think of the word feminist and, show that all of the women I interview, all of whom are incredibly diverse and full of energy and life expression, all of them claim it, say it, own this word.
When I was younger, I had this language of feminism, and I just used that language of feminism to really fight back, visibly head-on fight. with people. And I didn't care if someone was upset. I just had to make the point. And I knew if I'm right, then I'm going to make that point very strongly. Now I don't do that. वो जो language की तलवार है, that doesn't have to cut, right? Like that can be used to just point as well. And it is also a sense of deep security in my own freedom that allows me to do that. So when I'm not threatened easily, when my freedom of all kinds, social, political, whatever, if it is not threatened easily, then I'm not going to fight with you easily, right? I'm standing on a very secure ground of freedom to be able to say, no, I think relationships is a way to go for me. Like there is a role of anger as well in all of this, but I think I want to build communities of hope. And I think my nonprofit Saje Sapne does exactly that. Women at Leisure is a community of hope. And part of why Women at Leisure is so famous in whatever circles it is because it doesn't yell at anyone, is because it doesn't make you feel guilty. So many men have opened up to me in my DMs where they just share beautiful vulnerabilities that, damn it, I didn't notice this. You're so right. I just didn't notice what does my mother do when she's not working for us? And to be able to own that their own side, कि अच्छा मैंने तो ध्यान ही नहीं दिया. That only happens when there is a loving nudge and not happens when I'm making you feel guilty that how dare you? Have you ever noticed what does your mother do? So to me, feminism right now in 30s is building communities of hope and playing the politics of creation. Feminism is more than just resistance. Feminism gives you so many new ideas and imagination. And if you're constantly busy in fighting, then when are we going to be creating?
And that's actually one of the reasons why I'm so drawn to interviewing women who are using their creativity as a way to open up these conversations. So let me ask you about Saje Sapne.
Saje Sapne supports young rural women between 18 to 23 years old coming from marginalized caste groups and class groups to launch long-term careers, especially in domains where their presence is also not imagined right now. I think young women in villages have so much potential and they have aspirations, and we need to provide opportunities that match that potential and aspirations. So that's what we work on. But we're creating this community of sapnewalis, as we call them, women with fire in the belly. And it has to be rooted in the idea that communities is all we got. What else can we create together? At least that's the feminist pedagogy that we were talking about. Bell Hooks really talked a lot about it. Paulo Freire really talked about it. When you're teaching someone, education as a practice of freedom, it's not just a transaction of information. For education to be revolutionary, the way we have defined it is, it should be rooted in people's context. Learning should be not devoid of joy and pleasure and laughter and fun. It should be relational.
It feels like feminist ideology is also finding a way into the messages that you help put out there with the women you're working with.
The best feminist tool that I can give them is sense of inquiry, not my sets of belief. When I enter in my classroom, 30 young women coming from Dalit Bahujan communities, I'm not going to tell them, listen, I think wearing jeans is much better than this. Or I think, taking out time for yourself is much better than constantly working. I don't do that. My mentors asked me a lot of questions. They didn't give answers. They asked a lot of questions. So the best I can do is cultivate the strong sense of inquiry in them. And we do that. I think in Saje, we use a lot of pedagogy tools, which are just about building sense of inquiry. One of them is we use a lot of mantra, which is essentially mental models. One of them is, whenever you're stuck in a problem, this is the song you need to sing and act on, which is खुद से सोचो, इंटरनेट से पूछो, पूछो सपना दल से, फिर भी समझ ना आए तो पूछो दीदी दल से. So when you're stuck in a problem, think for yourself. Seek out the answers in the information pool that is on internet. Ask your peers, which is the Sapna Dal, a group of people that are there to support you in your dreams. And then even if none of this has worked, bring these ideas to a mentor and then put these ideas in front of them and then ask them what else can be done. We emphasize on this a lot.
Well, I think Kamla would be very happy with your song.
Here's the insight. Fun fact. Kamla Di actually ended up becoming a close mentor. She was
Wow.
a big sister, big supporter. She also gave us the first donation to Kickstart Saje, which became the salary of the first hire that I had. I wish she was alive, but she was amazing.
I mean, she has definitely influenced me in many, many ways. Before we end, I wanted to ask you why the project is called Basanti, Women at Leisure. I read somewhere that that was your mother's name, Basanti.
The project is named after her. Part of it was just, of course, because she was the reason why I started this, but also it was so befitting in a sense. Her name means spring. It's something that allows flourishing. And I think leisure does exactly that. Leisure allows flourishing of self. So it was really spot on. But the thing is, even when your parents are alive, you don't call them by their name, at least in, South Asian context. Even when she was alive, I would never say Basanti. And now that she's gone, there are even less reasons to name her, right? Like you will say Ma or Mama, right? Like you don't say Basanti. But because of this project, so many people name her. And sometimes people just, will DM me, hi, Basanti, I love your work. Or they would say, oh, you're the creator of Basanti. And in my head, every time someone says her name, like a whole visual comes up. And it's beautiful that I actually say her name more often than I think I have said her name even when she was alive.
I spoke to my mother every day, and she knew everything about my life.
Here's to the mothers.
Thank you.
Thanks to you too. What's her name?
See?
Yeah, that's what names do. I'm telling you.
Yep.
It's very powerful when someone says the name.
Parveen.
Parveen.
Thank you. When I first came across Women at Leisure, I was so drawn to the idea itself and how it is feminism and how it is Surabhi's ongoing conversation with her mother. It was only during my research when I was getting ready to write to Surabhi that it occurred to me that my mother is not only the face of her Kaancho Bone smudge, she is its heart. This podcast is the conversation I wish I'd had with her about the many ways women change, are expected to change, with marriage and motherhood, and the heavy invisible weight of social norms, all of which we just don't talk about enough. And why, I wonder, when my mother shared so much with me, she didn't share her thoughts on this. I never formulated these words in her lifetime, but thanks to Surabhi, I'm doing it today. I'm your host, Shauna. If you want to get in touch with us, enrage, or have a good cry, or just tell us what you're thinking, look for our webpage, because we have one now, or find us on Instagram. Until next week.